Hey guys, it's Julie from Z Square Crafts. Thank you so much for having me over on the TheAlleyWayStamps YouTube channel again today. I'm creating my first holiday card of 2015 and it's an easy one and one I hope to replicate because I think it's really nice and soft and kind of non-traditional. So to begin, I'm preparing my card base. I'm using an A2 size card today, so that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm going to prep my card base with my homemade anti-static tools. So that's a little pouch that I fill with cornstarch baby powder, and then I actually use double-sided tape to adhere it together. There will be a video for that coming if it's not already on my channel in case you're curious about that. So I am working on a piece of, or it's actually a pad of quad paper. I like it because it helps me line everything up, but also I find, especially when I'm embossing, it helps me get a really good impression because the surface that I'm stamping on is a little bit softer than my normal work surface. So I've grabbed the TheAlleyWayStamps Winter Butterflies stamp set. This is an oldie but a goodie, and I'm just going to stamp on a whole bunch of these little snowflakes over the entire front of my card base. It's really hard to see with the Versamark ink that I'm using, so I will stamp a few and then I'll add a little bit of pearly embossing powder just so that I can see where I'm stamping. I used a variety of these snowflakes that come in this stamp set. I really love making holiday cards that aren't like super over the top holiday, so this one is just a really nice subtle card. So you can see here that I'm adding this pearly embossing powder, and the reason I'm doing that now is just so that I can see where I've stamped. Like I said, with the Versamark, it's kind of tough to see. You can't always see it, especially when you're working on white. So for me, it's just easiest to sprinkle that on, and then I'll use my Post-it tape, stick that back down, and continue stamping. If you accidentally brush your embossed areas, because I haven't heat set this yet, so if you accidentally brush them and rub some of the embossing powder off, don't worry, because next time you sprinkle on more embossing powder, just sprinkle it onto that area as well and you should be fine. So I'm just repeating the same step over all of my background. I didn't want the card to be too busy, but I didn't want it to be too plain either, so I'm trying to kind of think ahead to the sizes of the snowflakes that I'll be using and fitting them in so that I'm leaving space for the other smaller ones. As I normally do when I'm creating my own background, I start with my largest image and then work towards my smallest so that I can fill in any spaces. I have really great success using this method, and I find that it really allows me to create a well-balanced background. So I'm working with my smallest snowflake now, and once I sprinkle the rest of my card with the embossing powder, I will zap that with my heat tool. So now that my card is all nicely heat embossed and set, I do let that cool for a couple minutes before I move on, just so that none of the warm embossing powder smears. I then use a Swiffer cloth to remove any of that anti-static powder or any residue that may be on the card. This is where the card really comes to life. You can already see the snowflakes because of that pearly embossing powder, but I am using peacock feather distress ink and a mini blending tool with a very light hand to go over the center of each of those snowflakes. Next, I'm going to fuss with some twine for a bit so that I can add a little bit of detail. I wrapped it around twice and then tied it in the back. I don't mind if you can see the tie on the inside of the card. That really doesn't bother me. And then I'm going to use a separate piece of twine here to create my bow. I find that this is the easiest way to create a nice bow. In order to make that stick and keep its shape, I just used a small glue dot to adhere that down. Next, because I found my twine was kind of slipping around on the card a little bit, I'm using my scissors to cut little notches into the side of the card base so that my twine has a little spot to kind of slip into. That really helps, especially if you're going to mail a card that has some kind of string or twine on it. It really helps keep everything in place. For my greeting, I am going to use the Sparkle sentiment that comes in the Winter Butterflies stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that again using Versamark ink. This time I'm going to use a piece of vellum, but I will use the same pearly embossing powder. This ended up being a very soft and subtle greeting, especially on the vellum. I just love how this turned out. With the pearly embossing powder, it adds just that perfect amount of winter shimmer that I just love. So once that was finished, I went ahead and trimmed that and then also cut a little fishtail banner on the end. And I'm going to use another glue dot to adhere that behind my bow. I felt like the card needed just a little something else, just a little bit more dimension and texture. So I'm using a variety of self-adhesive pearls to add that last touch. I did use one pearl just to make sure that my little sentiment strip there didn't move around, and that added the extra little anchoring that it needed. That finishes my card for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to this YouTube video. I will be back again next week to share another holiday video. In the meantime, have a great week and thanks so much. Bye!